Over to the next speaker. Light sciences and technologies help address different sustainable development goals. Light is influenced and continues to influence human culture. Modern scientific research depends on diverse collaboration for success. This interdisciplinary global exchange of knowledge must be broadly inclusive, seeking contributions from all sources based solely on excellence. The Photonics and Optical Society, by its nature, is diverse. So we, the photonics community at IIT Bombay, have tried to raise awareness of diversity and inclusivity on different levels. Rajeshwari is currently pursuing her PhD under the supervision of Dr. Rashmi Gupta from IIT Bombay and Professors Antonio and Naomi from Monash University on the project titled The Interactive Effect of Cognition, Emotion, and Motivation on Behavior. She did her post-graduation in clinical psychology from Christ University. Her master dissertation was on effectiveness of hypnotherapy on sociability aspects of children with autism. After graduating, she has worked as a special educator at APL Global School. Her keen interest in cognition, biological psychology, and interactive models to explain behaviors that are applicable in real life drove her towards the project at IITB Monash Academy. So over to Rajeshwari now.
Embracing inclusivity and diversity. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Lakshmi. So I hope that this will be a smooth transition after your a lot of technical talks that we've had for the day into a lot more general topic. So I'll be sharing my presentation with you. So when we first talk about diversity, a major component that actually defines diversity is our identity. How do we identify ourselves, right? So when we look at identity, you could call yourself based on where you're from or what you're doing. There are a lot of variables involved. So a study in India has shown that a major set of sociocultural and demographic dimensions of diversity are age, gender, physical disability, and so on, as you can see. So when we are trying to define a diverse environment, these are one of the major variables that we need to take into consideration. And as we are aware now, a lot of these dimensions are in fact evolving in a lot of senses. For example, gender is not anymore defined in terms of a binary of males and females. There is a lot more in the spectrum. There's also gender fluidity. So we are still evolving when it comes to including diversity and defining what diversity is itself. So why the talk for the day? So diversity as such, when we include and become a very diverse environment, which is multicultural accommodative, it has a lot of benefits as such. So the first thing that comes to our mind is sharing of perspectives, understanding a multicultural background, but it goes beyond that. Studies have shown that the benefits of climate, of multicultural climate, especially in a student setup or in an academic research setup, involves an increase in performance, productivity, and also decision making and information processing skills. So we understand that having a diverse environment is crucial for us. Now, moving on, we also had the title diversity as well as inclusivity. Now, how do we define inclusivity? So if you take diversity, it is kind of a legal obligation. Say, for example, you have a 26% reservation or a 5% reservation for a particular category, which is usually an underrepresented minority to be taken into consideration. But if you look at inclusivity, it is much beyond that. It is looking at a bigger picture. For example, if diversity is going to be puzzle pieces, then inclusivity is beyond that, putting the puzzle pieces together and looking at something broader, looking at something bigger. So from managing an environment which has multiple different kinds of individuals into an accepting and inclusive environment is because what are few ways where we can enhance and enrich our environment into becoming more inclusive. So before we move into how to go about including or making it a diverse and inclusive environment, I want to give a small example, something that we are used to on a day-to-day basis, gender gap, especially in the context of academic research is what I'll be talking on. You can see that in the graph, female authors have been having a consistent increase in their output and their population, but it is still a mainly male-dominated field. If you look at the pie charts in B, you'll also know that women who are expected to be, dominating in fields such as psychology and health sciences, that is not the case either. And this case is prominent throughout the world, right? And a major and a very disappointing fact is that even though there were many female researchers who started out their career, they soon start dropping out. That is, the length of the career of a female scientist or a female researcher is highly shortened. So when we look at gender gap, we think of a lot of reasons, and I would like to enlighten, especially point out a couple of these factors. The first one that we all think about is at mainly recruiting stage, we have stereotypes that come into play. A lot of us know about explicit stereotypes, wherein you would have heard statements where people tell you, women are not meant for science and women are better at art, right? But there are much more implicit factors that play a role. And one thing that I'd like to point out is the glass ceiling effect. If you look at a master's degree or a research degree as such, it is seen as a very higher level position in the academic field. So there seems to be, as research says, minorities seem to have an upper limit, which seems to be not very clear, which is why we call it as a glass ceiling. So it is kind of an invisible barrier that is put forth for minorities, especially women, and they are unable to cross it, which is why we have till date very few CEOs, which is a high level position. And similarly, in the cases of academics in research and so on. Now, even if they cross through the stages of recruitment and get into an institution of STEM, a science environment, we can see that the awards for research are mainly male dominated. Not only that, the economic compensation that is given is also not equivalent to their male colleagues, which I think we all on a lot of levels are aware of, but are unable to accept it. And the final one, which has a lot to do with the environment. As I said, even in the previous slide, a lot of women drop out of research because the environment is not friendly enough, or the environment is not matching their goals or values. And seems to be something which we can work on, because the other factors which are monetary in nature, we might not be able to play a role as such, because an entire garment or an entire or bigger body needs to play a role. But as such, what can we do depends upon how we change the environment. Because you would have seen that once you enter your classroom, you automatically start becoming competitive. When you get a paper or your results out, you start looking for who got the highest marks. So it's all about power and competition, and this creates an environment of isolation, which is not something that matches with many women's goals and values. So broadly, what can we do in an academic setup? So as an individual, we can see that there are two factors or two areas where we can work on. First one being empathy and compassion, and the second one being microaggression. So the first point, when I talk about empathy, often as a psychologist, I get a lot of questions on how do you differentiate between sympathy and empathy, right? So sympathy is something where you look at an individual. Say, for example, your classmate comes into class, they are offended by something, or they are disappointed, they are in a very bad state. So all you can say is, oh, I feel bad for you. Right now, that is sympathy. You take pity on them, you are upset, you have emotions invoked which are your own, and you're kind of reciprocating, right? But empathy involves wearing their shoes, as the common definition goes, wherein you try to be more understanding. Now, from understanding stems compassion. Okay, so next time when you're talking to your friends, when they're upset, or when they want you to listen, try saying, oh, I can only imagine, or I'm trying to understand what you're saying. That will create a major impact rather than saying, I feel bad for you, right? So having an open mind or being receptive to a diverse environment starts with being empathic and being compassionate towards accepting different kinds of individuals. And the second one is being aware of microaggressions, which involve very negative, condescending behaviors or insults more commonly that we see in a very diverse environment. So microaggressions are especially important because they will not be a very strong, explicit act, right? But it will be small, small actions such as name calling, Or when you're talking to someone, and if someone belonging to a minority makes a comment and you are being condescending to them, although everyone might laugh it off or find it as a joke, the individual who is from the underrepresented or the minority area will take an offense to it. So how do you know you are being microaggressive? Is because the other person gets offended by it. So that's how you become aware of it, right? So moving on, as I said, the environment plays a major role, and we'll be looking at what you can do. So the first and foremost point which I'd like to point out is everyone who enter the environment around you are competent, right? And they are given the opportunities. So a common belief is, just because they had reservation, they got in, they got it easy, which is definitely not the case. And the studies have shown that a lot of individuals who enter into academics because of quota tend to feel that they are not competent, that they don't deserve, right? So this is very evident across, and if you would have a conversation with someone from a minority, this will be very evident to you as well. So we need to understand that the other individual is equal and is competent, right? So that's when you start becoming more receptive and open to even accepting another individual from a diverse background. And the second one, which is very common, you can do it over a chai and charcha session. Just going on for a cup of coffee can help you with building up your relationships. So a major problem when it comes to accepting diversity and transgressing to an inclusive environment is crossing the boundaries. So we always have a boundary of, I'm from this particular region and they are from that particular region. So I have certain hesitations to talk to them. They are different than me. So in order to break the boundaries or blur the boundaries rather, we need to build perspectives on who they are, how they are. In order to do that, try having a conversation and asking them about stories, because an individual from a minority has a lot to say, in fact. So for example, in my life, I once went and wished a friend of mine happy Good Friday, and she took her time to explain to me why you shouldn't be wishing someone happy Good Friday, right? Although it was an overall very embarrassing experience, but I take it from a learning perspective, and I learned on that day that not to wish anyone happy Good Friday. So I knew it because I was interacting, I was talking, right? So stories are a great way to start when you want to build an environment. And the second one, which is more related, is proactive sensitivity plan, right? So if you see in a lot of industry workplaces, it's kind of a compulsory to have sensitivity training, a cultural sensitivity training or a cultural competence training. But we do not have that in academic settings. So what we can start doing is be proactive about it. Whether you belong to the us side or the them side, whether you belong to the minority or the majority, first and foremost thing that you have to know is learn about the stereotypes, learn about the possible bias. I say this because whether you're going to be on whichever side it is going to be, you will have to be ready to tackle what is coming at you, right? So you have to proactively plan on how you're going to overcome these. So if you belong to a minority, for example, trying to learn when someone is being offensive, how are you going to act? Are you going to be very defensive about it? Are you going to say something snarky about it? How are you going to handle the situation is going to be crucial on how the borders are going to be crossed and met. So that's about proactivity and sensitivity planning with respect to how you can do in your environment. And the last and final point is when we look at an inclusive environment, we think that it's a very neutral environment. We look at how to make it a gender neutral or an ethnic neutral environment. But in reality, what we have to do is embrace our authentic identities. Because when you look at a gender neutral environment, you start having a sense that you're losing your identity, which is very important to you, right? Whether you are belonging to whichever side, you will still want to hold on to your identity. So that is where there's no hard and fast rule on, like how do you approach and how do you make an environment inclusive. But the first place to start is being authentic, revealing that, yes, I have this background, but I do respect you. So being authentic and having mutual respect goes a long way when it comes to building up an inclusive environment. So I hope that the talk has given you an idea about how to move on to a moral responsibility rather than looking at it as a legal obligation. So hoping to welcome a greater inclusive environment. If you have any questions, feel free to mail me or ask me the questions directly. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So it was a very good talk, and I'm sure you did educate us well about creating a better workplace.